The first time I noticed something was off about my neighbor's air conditioning unit. I was watering my prized rose garden on a scorching Tuesday morning in July. The temperature had already climbed to 93 degrees by 10 a.m., and the weather app on my phone promised another day of relentless heat that would push the mercury well past 100. As I carefully directed the stream of water toward the base of my Queen Elizabeth roses, I heard it, or rather, I didn't hear it. Complete silence. Now, you might think that silence from a neighbor's AC unit would be a blessing, especially when you're someone like me who values peace and quiet above almost everything else. But here's the thing. It was the middle of July in Phoenix, Arizona, where the ambient temperature regularly turns sidewalks into griddles and car steering wheels into instruments of torture. Every single house on Maple Grove Drive had their air conditioning systems running at full blast, creating a constant symphony of humming compressors and whirring fans that had become the soundtrack of summer. Every house except 4247 Maple Grove Drive, the Martinez residence. I straightened up from my roses, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my gardening glove, and studied the pristine white unit sitting on the side of their house. It looked perfect. Too perfect, actually. The housing was spotless, without a single streak of rust or weather staining that every other AC unit in our development had accumulated over the years. There were no condensation stains on the concrete pad beneath it, no telltale water droplets that should have been constantly dripping in this heat. Most peculiar of all, I realized I had never once seen the fan spinning, despite having lived next door to the Martinez family for the past 3 years. My curiosity was piqued, but I told myself I was probably just being paranoid. After all, Ramon and Elena Martinez seemed like perfectly normal neighbors. They kept their lawn meticulously maintained, never played music too loud, and always waved cheerfully when we crossed paths at the mailbox. Elena even brought me homemade tamales every Christmas, wrapped in corn husks and still warm from her kitchen. They had 2 teenage children, Miguel, who was 17 and obsessed with skateboarding, and Sophia, 15 and apparently destined for valedictorian, based on the number of academic achievement yard signs that sprouted on their front lawn each semester. But over the next several weeks, my suspicions grew stronger. I found myself paying closer attention during my morning and evening garden maintenance routines. I started timing my outdoor activities to coincide with the peak heat hours, when every rational person in Arizona would have their cooling systems working overtime. Yet the Martinez AC unit remained silent and still, like a theatrical prop waiting for its cue that never came. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was becoming increasingly obsessed with my neighbor's air conditioning situation while simultaneously struggling with my own cooling costs. My monthly electric bills had become genuinely frightening documents that I dreaded opening. The previous month's statement had shown a usage charge of $347, and that was with me keeping the thermostat set at a barely tolerable 78 degrees during the day and only dropping it to 75 at night. I had started taking cold showers just to give my body a break from the heat, and I'd invested in blackout curtains for every window in my house to keep the sun from turning my living room into a greenhouse. Meanwhile, the Martinez family seemed completely unaffected by the brutal summer conditions. I would see them coming and going at all hours, looking comfortable and refreshed. Elena would work in her garden during the middle of the afternoon, when I could barely stand to be outside long enough to check my mailbox. The kids would practice skateboard tricks in their driveway at 2 in the afternoon, seemingly oblivious to the heat that would have sent me running for air-conditioned shelter. It was during one of these observations that I noticed something else peculiar. Our homeowners association, led by the notoriously detail-oriented president Margaret Thornberry, had recently completed their annual exterior compliance inspection. Every homeowner had received a detailed report listing any violations or areas of concern regarding the external appearance of their property. I had been cited for allowing my garden hose to remain visible from the street. Apparently, it should have been properly stored in a location not visible to the community, and for having a small oil stain on my driveway that needed professional cleaning. But the Martinez family's inspection report, which Elena had accidentally dropped near the mailbox cluster and which I had helpfully retrieved and returned to her, while perhaps glancing at it just briefly, showed no violations whatsoever. In fact, there was a specific note praising their well-maintained HVAC exterior unit that meets all community aesthetic standards. Margaret Thornberry had personally signed off on their air conditioning installation, noting that it was an exemplary example of proper equipment placement and visual integration with the home's exterior design. This struck me as particularly interesting because I remembered when the Martinez family had first moved in 3 years ago. They had submitted the required HOA architectural review request for their air conditioning installation, just like every other homeowner was required to do. The process typically took 6 to 8 weeks, involved multiple inspections, and required detailed specifications about the equipment being installed, including noise ratings, visual impact assessments, and landscaping plans to minimize the visual disruption to the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. Margaret Thornberry took these architectural reviews very seriously. She had rejected my initial request to install a pergola in my backyard because the wood stain I had selected was apparently too rustic for our community's design standards. She had made my next-door neighbor on the other side, elderly Mr. Peterson, relocate his garden shed 3 times before approving its final placement. The idea that she would have approved the Martinez family's AC installation without multiple inspections and detailed documentation seemed highly unlikely. Yet their unit had sailed through the approval process without any apparent complications or delays. I began to wonder if there was more to this situation than met the eye. My opportunity to investigate further came during the community's annual summer block party held at the neighborhood pool and clubhouse on the first Saturday in August. It was one of those mandatory attendance and practice events where showing up demonstrated your commitment to community spirit, and failing to appear was noticed and remembered by the HOA board. I had been dreading it for weeks, partly because of the heat, and partly because these gatherings always seemed to devolve into passive-aggressive competitions about whose lawn was greenest and whose children were achieving the most academically. But this year, I had a mission. I positioned myself strategically near the refreshment table, where I could observe the Martinez family while appearing to be focused on choosing between the various homemade salads and desserts that neighbors had contributed. Elena was holding court near the pool, discussing her secret to growing such vibrant bougainvillea in the desert climate. Ramon was engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with several other fathers about the merits of different lawn fertilizers. The kids were doing what teenagers do at adult social gatherings, looking bored and checking their phones. I was making my 3rd trip past the dessert table. Mrs. Chen's lemon bars were genuinely exceptional, when I overheard a conversation that made me nearly choke on my iced tea. Margaret Thornberry was speaking with Janet Morrison, who lived 2 streets over and served as the HOA's Architectural Review Committee secretary. I still can't believe how perfectly that Martinez installation turned out, Margaret was saying, her voice carrying that tone of professional satisfaction she reserved for discussing successful community improvements. When they first submitted their plans, I was concerned about the visual impact, but the final result exceeded all my expectations. Janet nodded enthusiastically. The contractor they used really knew what they were doing. You can barely tell it's there unless you're specifically looking for it. And the noise level is absolutely minimal. I've never heard a sound from it, even when I walk past their house during my evening walks. Exactly, Margaret agreed. It's exactly the kind of thoughtful installation we should encourage in our community. Functional, efficient, and aesthetically pleasing. I've actually started using their contractor information as a reference for other homeowners who are planning similar installations. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the 100-degree temperature. Margaret Thornberry was praising the Martinez family's air conditioning unit for being quiet, so quiet, in fact, that it was completely silent. But she was talking about it as if this were a positive feature, rather than a sign that something was fundamentally wrong. As the block party continued, I found myself studying the Martinez family with new eyes. They were mingling normally, participating in conversations, laughing at neighbors' jokes, and generally appearing to be model community members. But there was something almost theatrical about their behavior, as if they were playing roles in a carefully scripted performance. Elena's laugh seemed just a little too bright, Ramon's interest in lawn care just a little too enthusiastic, and both teenagers The call I made to the City of Phoenix Building Inspection Department on that Friday morning would haunt me for months afterward. I had rehearsed my complaint carefully, framing it as a concerned neighbor worried about potential safety violations. rather than someone who had been conducting amateur surveillance operations. The inspector who answered, a weary-sounding man named Dave Kowalski, listened patiently as I explained my concerns about an air conditioning unit that appeared to be non-functional, yet had somehow passed HOA approval. "Ma'am," Dave said after I finished my carefully prepared explanation, "I appreciate your concern for neighborhood safety, but what you're describing sounds like a civil matter between you and your HOA. Our department only gets involved when there are actual building, code violations, or permit issues." "But that's exactly what I'm worried about," I pressed. "What if they've installed some kind of unpermitted cooling system? What if it's dangerous?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dave spoke again, his tone had shifted, from dismissive to cautious. "Did you say the address was 4247 Maple Grove Drive?" "Yes, that's correct." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come down to our office this afternoon. Can you be here by 2 p.m.? The urgency in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Is everything okay? Did I say something wrong?" "Just please come in. Ask for me specifically, Dave Kowalski. And ma'am, don't discuss this with anyone else until we've had a chance to talk." I spent the rest of the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, wondering what could have prompted such a dramatic change in Dave's attitude. The Phoenix Building Inspection Department was housed in a bland government building downtown, the kind of place where fluorescent lights flickered, and the air conditioning was set to Arctic levels that made you grateful for the desert heat when you stepped back outside. Dave Kowalski turned out to be a middle-aged man with graying hair and the kind of deep tan that came from years of outdoor inspections. He led me to a small conference room and closed the door behind us, which seemed unusual for what should have been a routine complaint discussion. "Before we go any further," he said, settling into his chair with a heavy sigh, "I need to ask you some questions. How long have you lived next to 4247 Maple Grove Drive?" 3 years, I replied, "since the Martinez family moved in." "And in those 3 years, have you ever noticed anything unusual about the property? Any construction activity, unusual deliveries, people coming and going at strange hours?" I thought about it carefully. "No, nothing like that. They're actually very quiet neighbors. That's part of what made the air conditioning situation so puzzling." Dave nodded slowly, then opened a thick manila folder that had been sitting on the table between us. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable, but I need you to understand that this is an extremely sensitive situation. The property you're asking about is currently under investigation by multiple federal agencies." My heart began to race. Federal agencies? What kind of investigation? The original owners of that house, Dr. Richard and Patricia Blackwood, were not exactly who they appeared to be. Dr. Blackwood claimed to be a retired engineering professor, but it turns out he was actually Dr. Richard Volkov, a Russian scientist who had been working on classified climate control technology for the military before he defected to the United States in 2017. I felt like the conference room was spinning around me. Climate control technology? Specifically, something called localized atmospheric manipulation. The theory is that you can create controlled weather conditions within a very small area. Essentially, you can make it winter in your backyard while it's summer everywhere else. The applications for military use are obvious, but the technology was considered too dangerous and unstable for practical deployment. Dave pulled out a series of photographs from the folder. They showed what appeared to be construction blueprints, but unlike any I had ever seen. Instead of normal house plans, these diagrams showed elaborate underground systems, complex electrical configurations, and what looked like some kind of containment field generators. When Dr. Blackwood, Volkov, disappeared, the FBI discovered that he had been secretly testing his climate control technology in the house on Maple Grove Drive. The entire property was essentially turned into a research facility disguised as a suburban home. They built the fake air conditioning unit as a cover story, but the real climate control system was hidden underground. "But the Martinez family," I stammered. "They're just normal neighbors. Elena makes tamales. The kids go to the local high school." Dave's expression grew even more serious. "That's where things get complicated. The Martinez family is not who they appear to be either. They're actually a team of federal agents who have been living in the house as part of an ongoing operation to monitor and contain the climate control technology. The room fell silent as I tried to process this information. Everything I thought I knew about my quiet neighborhood was crumbling around me. So when I saw Ramon wearing winter clothes in 114-degree heat, he was probably testing the system or dealing with a malfunction. The technology is extremely unstable. Sometimes it works too well, creating dangerous temperature differentials that could theoretically affect the surrounding area. That's why we have agents living there full-time, to make sure the system doesn't accidentally create a localized blizzard that could endanger the entire neighborhood. Dave leaned forward, his expression intense. Here's the thing, though. Your call this morning triggered some alerts in our system. Apparently, there have been unusual energy readings coming from that property over the past few weeks. The agents living there have been reporting some kind of system malfunction, but they've been unable to locate the source of the problem. What kind of malfunction? The climate control system appears to be expanding its range. Instead of just affecting the interior of the house, it's starting to create temperature anomalies in the surrounding area. Small ones so far, but the readings are getting stronger. I thought about the strange shimmer I had seen around their sliding glass door, the way Ramon's breath had been visible in the extreme heat. So what does this mean for the neighborhood? Worst case scenario? The system could create a localized weather event that could affect several city blocks. We're talking about the possibility of sudden temperature drops, unpredictable storms, maybe even localized tornadoes. The technology was abandoned by the military precisely because it was too dangerous to control. Dave closed the folder and looked at me directly. The agents posing as the Martinez family have been trying to shut down the system safely, but they need help. Dr. Volkov disappeared before he could provide the shutdown procedures, and the technology is beyond anything our current experts understand. We think the system is responding to some kind of external trigger, something that's been happening in the neighborhood recently. External trigger? Like what? That's what we need to figure out. Has anything changed in your neighborhood over the past few months? New construction? Changes in the power grid? Anything that might be affecting the electromagnetic environment? I racked my brain trying to think of any recent changes. Then it hit me. The HOA had everyone install new smart meters for their utility monitoring system about 2 months ago. They said it would help identify energy inefficiencies. Dave's eyes widened. Smart meters? What kind of smart meters? I don't know exactly. They were installed by a company called Advanced Energy Solutions. Margaret Thornberry, our HOA president, arranged the whole thing. She said it was part of a pilot program to help reduce neighborhood energy costs. Dave was already reaching for his phone. I need to make some calls. This could be the trigger we've been looking for. Smart meters emit electromagnetic frequencies that could potentially interfere with the climate control system. As Dave made his urgent phone calls, I sat in the conference room trying to process everything I had learned. My quiet suburban neighborhood was apparently ground zero for a potentially catastrophic weather control experiment. My neighbors were federal agents trying to prevent a disaster, and I had unknowingly stumbled into the middle of a situation that could endanger thousands of people. When Dave finished his calls, his expression was grim. We need to evacuate the neighborhood. The smart meter signals are definitely interfering with the climate control system, and the agents report that the temperature differentials are becoming more extreme. They're concerned about a complete system failure. What would happen if the system completely failed? Based on the theoretical models, we could see a localized weather event equivalent to a Category 3 hurricane, but with temperature variations instead of wind. Parts of the neighborhood could experience temperatures below freezing, while other areas could see temperatures above 140 degrees. The infrastructure isn't designed to handle those kinds of extremes. As we prepared to leave the building, Dave handed me a business card. I need you to go home and pack a bag. Don't tell anyone else about what we've discussed, but be ready to leave at a moment's notice. We're going to try to shut down the system safely, but if we can't, what about the Martinez family? The agents, I mean? They're prepared for this posse,